Hello, cooking enthusiasts. In this week's video, we're gonna go over some footage of my dad and I making fried pizza. In Italian, it's called pizza fritta, and I think it's a really nice introductory style if you want to get into making more pizza at home. There's a few different styles of fried pizzas you can make, but I think it's a good opportunity to really get used to working with the dough, but there's a lot less finicky handling of the dough, and there's a lot less worrying about baking temperatures. Obviously, you can make any type of dough and bake it in a regular oven, but many people who are very passionate about getting more of a pizzeria style pizza at home will do a lot to maximize their oven temperature, going from the basics of cast iron, pizza stones, pizza steels, making or buying standalone gadgets for either wood fire or gas pizza ovens. All of that is exciting and something I am looking into as well. But the beauty of the pizza fritta is the only equipment you need is some sort of pot or pan that can be used for even a relatively shallow deep fry. So you can get used to the routine of making, fermenting, and doing the basic shaping of the pizza dough, but you also then don't need to handle it as carefully for when you're doing a more standard baked pizza. So I'll quickly go over the very basic dough recipe I was using, and I think this is a really good sort of starting point as a general pizza dough recipe. It's going to be on screen right now, both as a baker's percentages recipe and as an example recipe based on 400 grams of flour. It will also be in the video description. So, first is, of course, 100% flour. I would recommend at least some mixture of bread flour with all-purpose, or entirely bread flour, because you want a decent amount of gluten development. If you want, you can even use some specialty imported 00 flour, but really not necessary for this application. Next is 65% water, and I think 65% hydration is a nice intermediate hydration level to start working with for pizza dough. And feel free to use regular tap water if you find it tastes good. Otherwise, of course, use a Brita filter or something equivalent. Next is 2% salt. Again, either sea salt, kosher salt, anything but iodized salt. And you do really want to measure this by weight, but if you are serious about baking, cooking, and pizza making, you should already have some kitchen scales. Finally, we have the yeast, and you want 0.1% yeast scaled to your flour. But if you're doing a really small batch of dough, you can round that up to 1 gram of yeast. I know that seems like an impossibly small amount of dried yeast, but I think that's a real distinguishing factor of more traditional Italian pizza dough recipes. If you are in a time crunch, you can very slightly increase the quantity of yeast. But again, I think this is good practice for scheduling your pizza making and getting used to the schedule of a very slow fermentation. Starting with such a small amount of yeast means you'll need at least a day, day and a half before you can use this dough, but it also means it will last an additional 2 or even 3 days in the fridge without being completely over fermented. So it gives you some flexibility. Basic procedure, you want to combine the flour, water, and yeast first. Form a very basic rough dough. Give it at least a half an hour to rest, and then knead in and incorporate your salt. You want to knead probably for 5 to 8 minutes with a machine, or 10 to 15 minutes by hand until the dough looks nice and cohesive. You want to give the entire dough ball a good 4 to 12 hours of bulk fermentation at room temperature, and then you want to divide it into individual dough balls. There's a lot of different techniques for shaping and dividing pizza dough, so I recommend you research some of those on YouTube. For the fried pizza, we did a mixture of 60 and 90 gram dough balls, so 2 to 3 ounces, which works out well. And then the dough balls can undergo secondary fermentation in the fridge. Again, minimum somewhere around 18 to 24 hours. Maximum probably close to 3 days. Again, if you are a little time crunched, you can probably get away with closer to 12 hours if it's just in a cool room instead of the fridge. And then, as you've been seeing, it's really just about stretching out the dough and then frying it. You want a neutral oil, of course, that can reach a relatively high temperature. Shoot for between 350 and 375 Fahrenheit for frying the dough. Again, this is a really good opportunity to practice some hand stretching, but you can also just roll out the dough for fried pizza. You can also practice making miniature calzone type shapes. Once the dough looks good, you can just have a variety of toppings to put on afterward. The first footage in this video was just a riff on a margherita pizza, so little pieces of mozzarella, cherry tomatoes, and some basil. Next was a little fried calzone, and the final fried pizza was a little bit experimental. Some pretty much failed brown butter, mayonnaise, a little bit of leftover sous vide beef, and some olives. But that is pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video and it inspires you to make pizza fritta or just pizza dough in general. If you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching.